Welcome to our channel Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. For years, he lived in plain sight. People walked past him every day, never knowing who he really was. The case went cold, the trail disappeared, and everyone believed the truth was lost forever. But somewhere, one small detail refused to stay buried. Investigators never stopped wondering, never stopped waiting. Time passed, technology changed, and memories faded. Then suddenly, years later, everything came back. A forgotten clue, a quiet mistake, a trap built slowly and silently. He thought he had escaped justice. He thought time had saved him. He was wrong. This is the story of how, years later, they finally trapped him. For many years, he lived a life that looked ordinary and harmless. He woke up at the same time every morning, left his home quietly, and returned before dark. He worked small jobs, spoke politely, and never drew attention to himself. Neighbors described him as calm and distant, someone who kept to himself. No one suspected that his quiet life was built on fear and control. He believed that staying invisible was the only way to survive, long before this quiet life began. His name had once appeared in a police investigation. At the time, something terrible had happened, and the community was shaken. Investigators searched for answers, but evidence was limited, and witnesses were confused. In those early days, police questioned him carefully. He answered every question without hesitation. His words were calm, clear, and confident. There were no visible cracks. Without proof, police were forced to move on. As months passed, the case slowly lost attention. New crimes appeared, resources shifted, and the pressure faded. What once felt urgent became another unsolved file buried in storage. He watched this happen from a distance. Each passing year made him more confident. He believed the danger was over. He believed time had erased suspicion. He made changes to protect himself. He moved away from places connected to the past. He changed routines and avoided people who asked too many questions. He learned how to appear forgettable. To him, survival meant control. Control over his words, his actions, and his image. What he did not realize was that some investigators never forgot him. Even when the case was no longer active, his name stayed in certain minds. Something about him never fully made sense. His statements were too clean. His emotions never matched the situation. These details were not enough to act on, but they were enough to remember. Years later, a new team began reviewing old cases. They were trained to look for what others missed. They did not accept past conclusions as final. They believed that time often reveals what fear once hid. When they opened the old file, they noticed his name immediately. It appeared more than once, always close to key moments. They started by rebuilding the timeline from the beginning. Every movement, every phone call, every known location was placed carefully in order. At first, the timeline looked ordinary, but slowly, gaps appeared. These gaps were not random. They appeared where his story had been too simple. Technology had changed since the original investigation. Tools that did not exist before were now available. Old records were examined again. Digital data, once considered useless, was reviewed with new methods. What once looked incomplete now had meaning. Investigators discovered that his movements years ago placed him closer to the truth than he had admitted. He had been careful, but perfection is impossible. One small detail stood out. It was something overlooked at the time, dismissed as coincidence. Now it looked deliberate. Instead of acting immediately, investigators chose patience. They knew that sudden pressure could cause mistakes on their side. This time, they wanted certainty. They watched him quietly. Surveillance was subtle. No police cars. No obvious presence. Just observation. He noticed nothing. He continued his routine, confident and unaware. To him, the past was dead. The idea that anyone still cared felt impossible. He believed he had outlasted the system. Behind the scenes, investigators spoke to people from his past. They asked careful questions, never revealing too much. Some people remembered nothing. Others remembered small things that once seemed unimportant. A strange comment. A sudden absence. a calm reaction during chaos. Each memory was written down. On its own, none of it proved anything. But together, they formed a pattern that could no longer be ignored. His image as an ordinary man began to crack. Investigators also reviewed his old statements word by word. They compared them to recent public records and interviews. The language was similar. Too similar. He used the same phrases years apart. The same explanations? This suggested preparation, not memory. Still, they waited. Rushing would only help him. They wanted him comfortable. They wanted him confident. Confidence creates mistakes. He continued living his quiet life, unaware that the past was slowly closing in. Every day that passed brought investigators closer to the moment they had waited years to reach. The case was no longer cold. It was awake again, and for the first time in many years, the truth was moving toward him instead of away. As the investigation quietly moved forward, investigators became more confident that time had finally turned in their favor. What once felt like loose pieces were now beginning to fit together. The picture was still incomplete, but the shape was clear enough to follow. They knew they had to move carefully. One wrong step could send him running or force him to shut down completely. They began with conversations that felt harmless. An officer stopped by under the excuse of updating records. Another asked casual questions about his past, framed as routine checks. He answered politely, just as he always had. His voice was steady, and his words came easily. On the surface, nothing had changed. But investigators noticed small delays before certain answers. They noticed how he avoided eye contact when specific dates were mentioned. These details were subtle. But subtle details matter. They compared his new answers with statements he gave years earlier. Most of the story stayed the same, but not all of it. Certain details shifted. Locations moved slightly. Times became unclear. These changes were small enough to seem natural, but too consistent to ignore at the same time. Forensic experts worked quietly in the background. Old evidence was tested again using newer methods. Items that once meant nothing were examined closely. One object in particular stood out. It was something he had kept, believing it was harmless. Years ago, there had been no way to connect it to anything meaningful. Now, it told a different story. The results did not scream guilt on their own. Instead, they whispered. They placed him closer to the truth than he ever admitted. It was not enough for an arrest, but it was enough to tighten the pressure. Investigators also studied his daily routine. They learned when he left home, where he spent his time, and how often he spoke to others. His life was controlled and predictable. That made observation easier. It also revealed something important. He avoided certain places without clear reason. Places that connected quietly to the past. They spoke again with people who once knew him well. Time had softened memories, but it had not erased them. A former friend remembered how he reacted strangely to news coverage years ago. A neighbor recalled him cleaning his car late at night after a significant event. These memories were imperfect, but together they supported what investigators already suspected. Still, they waited. The goal was not to scare him. The goal was to let him believe he was safe. Confidence makes people careless, and eventually, carelessness creates opportunity. The pressure began to affect him, even if he did not understand why. He slept less. He checked his surroundings more often. His calm routine started to crack. He began changing small habits. Investigators saw this as confirmation. Innocent people do not feel hunted. Behind closed doors, prosecutors reviewed every detail. They challenged the evidence, looking for weaknesses. They asked difficult questions and demanded stronger connections. Investigators responded with patience. They knew the case had to survive intense scrutiny. There would be no second chance. Slowly, the plan took shape. They would not confront him directly. They would invite him to talk again. Not as a suspect, but as a person of interest. It would feel informal, friendly, safe. When the request came, he agreed. Refusing would raise suspicion. He believed he could control the conversation just as he had before. He prepared his answers carefully. He reminded himself that there was still no direct proof. The interview room was quiet. No pressure. No accusations. Investigators spoke calmly and listened closely. At first, he relaxed. He repeated familiar stories. His confidence returned. But then the questions changed slightly. Dates were rearranged. Details were reversed. Investigators watched closely. He hesitated. Not long, but long enough. His answers became less certain. He corrected himself more than once. These moments were recorded carefully. Each pause was meaningful. When shown evidence he did not expect them to have, his expression changed. He tried to explain it away, but his words lost strength. He spoke more quickly. His breathing changed. Years of control began slipping. Investigators ended the interview without confrontation. They thanked him and let him leave. That was the most powerful move they could make. He walked away confused, unsettled, and afraid. From that moment, his behavior shifted dramatically. He made phone calls late at night. He searched for information about old cases. He avoided public places. These actions did not go unnoticed. The trap was nearly complete. All that remained was timing. Investigators knew the next move had to be perfect. They waited for the final mistake, and without realizing it, he was already making it. The final phase began quietly, just like everything else. Investigators knew that the smallest mistake now could undo years of work. They did not rush. They did not celebrate. They waited, watching him closely as his fear slowly changed his behavior. The confidence that once protected him was gone. In its place was tension that followed him everywhere. He began to isolate himself. Phone calls became shorter. Conversations ended quickly. He avoided people who once felt safe. Investigators saw this clearly. His world was shrinking, and pressure was building from the inside. That kind of pressure almost always leads to errors. The mistake came in a way no one expected. He tried to protect himself by controlling information, but control had limits. He contacted someone from his past, someone he believed he could trust. He spoke carefully, but not carefully enough. The call was short, emotional, and revealing. It was enough. Investigators moved fast, but not visibly. They verified everything. They confirmed timelines, locations, and intent. The call connected directly to evidence already collected. What had once been suspicion now became structure. The case was finally strong. Prosecutors reviewed the final file late into the night. Every detail was questioned again. They wanted no doubt, no weakness, no room for escape. When they finished, there was silence in the room. Everyone understood what that silence meant. The case was ready. The arrest was planned for a normal day. No dramatic timing. No public display. They wanted him calm. They wanted him unprepared. Early in the morning, officers arrived quietly. No sirens, no crowd. Just a knock at the door. When he opened it, he knew instantly. Years of fear surfaced in one moment. His face changed before anyone spoke. His body reacted faster than his mind. He tried to speak, but the words felt useless. The truth was already standing in front of him. They told him why they were there. They spoke slowly and clearly. He listened, but his eyes were distant. For years, he had imagined this moment, always believing he could avoid it. Now, it was real. At the station, the room felt smaller than he remembered. The questions were familiar, but the tone was different. This time, investigators were not searching. They already knew. They showed him the evidence, one piece at a time. They did not rush. He denied it at first. The habit was automatic. But denial had lost its power. Each lie collapsed under the weight of proof. His voice grew quieter. His posture changed. Control slipped away completely. Hours passed. Silence filled the room. Investigators waited. Silence does what pressure cannot. Eventually he spoke again, not to confess, but to explain. He spoke about fear, about mistakes, about time. He believed explanations still mattered, but explanations could not change facts. The arrest became official. Handcuffs closed quietly. There was no struggle, no anger, just exhaustion. Years of running had finally ended. News reached the public slowly. At first, people were confused, then shocked. Many had known him as an ordinary man. The idea that he carried such a past felt impossible. But evidence does not depend on belief. For those who waited years for answers, the arrest brought mixed emotions. Relief came with pain. Closure came with memories. Justice does not erase the past, but it acknowledges it. In the weeks that followed, investigators reflected on the case. It was not solved by luck. It was solved by patience. Time did not weaken the truth. It strengthened it. He believed silence would save him. He believed distance would protect him. He believed the world would forget. He was wrong. In the end, it was not one action that trapped him. It was many small choices made over many years. Each choice left a mark. Each mark stayed. Years later, the truth returned quietly, just as it had waited. And when it arrived, there was nowhere left to hide. That is how they finally trapped him. Years passed, but the truth never disappeared. It waited. It watched. In the end, it was not speed or luck that brought justice, but patience and time. Every lie left a mark. Every silence left a trace. When the moment finally came, there was nowhere left to hide. For those who waited years for answers, this was not just an arrest. It was proof that truth survives, even when forgotten. If you believe justice matters, remember this story. Time does not erase. For watching more amazing videos like this, subscribe our channel Crime Loom.